Nestled in the heart of historic downtown Wilkesboro, the 1915 offers a wedding experience like no other. Once a federal courthouse and post office, the 1915 combines rich history with timeless charm. From intimate gatherings to full-day rentals, we provide the perfect backdrop for your most cherished moments. With indoor and outdoor options, bridal and groom suites, every detail is crafted just for you. Make your wedding unforgettable at the 1915, Wilkesboro's historic wedding venue, where your story begins.
Closed captions for this episode of Life in Wilkes is brought to you by Deal Insurance Agency in Wilkesboro, an award-winning, experienced, family-owned and operated agency with service and coverage that goes above and beyond expectations.
Join us on a captivating journey as we explore the charm, history, and vibrant culture of Wilkes County. Discover the hidden gems, inspiring stories, and remarkable people that make Wilkes a place worth knowing and celebrating. Join us now and experience the unique essence of life in Wilkes.
Good morning, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. How you doing, Carl?
I'm doing great. So we know each other. We met years ago up on Grandfather Mountain, but why don't you tell everybody who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Well, I appreciate it. I'm the current and 11th president in line of the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games. And so it was in that context that we met, and that's why I'm here today.
Right.
I grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee, and then moved over to Raleigh, North Carolina. I first attended the Highland Games in 1968 with my parents. That was a bucket list trip for my parents, and they never went back, and I never left.
Well, that's amazing. Well, I do remember those earlier meetings that we had. I think we've done three visits for the Highland Games with Life in the Carolinas, and I think you were part of each one of those. I think one of the visits there was who was it? Governor Perdue, I think, was there. Remember that year? So that was a good game.
It was.
I also met I made several friends that year. And the River Winds, they were a group of, Joseph and Laura Lynn Riverwind. They had a group called the Blessed Blend. And they told the story. Their story was about the idea of the Native American ladies and the Scots getting hooked up, and evidently back in the day, before it was a cool thing, it wasn't a cool thing. But
yeah, exactly.
However, things mellowed, and it became a common thing to see happen. So hearing that story was amazing.
I've developed quite an interest in the American Indian, Scottish theme that from those early Scottish immigrants, and it's very interesting. We've got one of our newest board members is a fellow named Jim Pearson, and Jim is half Cherokee.
Okay,
and he knows quite a bit about that, and he knows, of course, a lot of the elders in Cherokee that know more. So one of these days I'm going to try to put together a lecture down at our Scottish Cultural Village about that. I think people might be as interested in that as I am.
Oh, I think that would be fascinating. I mean, it's all part of our heritage and history, and how people figure out how to get along, right?
It is, and it's if we don't understand history and don't understand history in the way that it actually developed, I think we're going to be much poorer for it.
I think you're right. There are a lot of answers in how things work and how to fix things if we read a few books.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we try to do down at the Scottish Cultural Village is we try to not romanticize it. We try to tell it like it was, because like it was is so interesting. Anyway, it doesn't need the romantic veneer added to the top of it.
Sure.
So
it was actually pretty romantic and dynamic in its reality.
I think so.
Yes, sure. Well, let's talk about before we get deep into the to the good stuff, which I think is where we were going, about the history and the heritage and the celebration of that. But let's talk for a moment about the Highland Games, because you're president of the group that facilitates the Highland Games. So let's talk about the history, if you would. I particularly thought that it would be good for you to be on our Life in Wilkes show, because Wilkes County has a lot of Scottish heritage, right?
Sure does.
A lot. And we have many friends that we've talked to on the show about that. But to have you on, I thought was particularly good, and also congratulating you on your being named the 2024 Historian of the Year for North Carolina Society of Historians.
What a tremendous surprise that was, and I felt very, very honored to have received that, and really unworthy, to tell you the truth. But I was recognized for the effort that I was credited with putting into the preservation of Scottish heritage and culture, both in North Carolina, the USA, and really around the world, because of the games, the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, and I was very grateful for that. That was a really nice thing for those folks to do.
Well, I think I think it was very appropriate, and when and I'm thinking as the weeks and the months and the years go by, you'll think about that award, and you'll probably attend more of those annual gatherings.
Yeah,
because they're very interesting.
They were.
I mean, we were both there and sitting in that room. Everyone there receiving some type of an award, or being there to support those who are. All of them are part of preserving some aspect of our heritage, history, and how it interacts with today.
And I learned several things sitting there at the Jean Lafitte in Lincolnton, North Carolina.
Right.
Who knew?
Right.
So Carl, the game started in 1956. August 19th of 1956. It was a one-day games. Mm-hmm. August 19th was a Sunday. That date was picked because it was the anniversary of Prince Charlie raising his standard at Glenfinnan in Scotland in 1745. And the Games was co-founded by Agnes McCrae Morton, who owned the land, and Donald Frank McDonald, who was a reporter for the Charlotte News. And Donald came from Clio, South Carolina. That's where he was originally raised. And he, at the time of the games, was a bachelor, and he did his reporting and writing, as I said, for the Charlotte News. And he decided in 1954 that he'd take a trip over and visit the land of his ancestors. And he went to Scotland and went to the Braemar Highland Games, the one that the king attends. And Donald wrote about it. He wrote a series of articles in the paper, and of course Agnes read those. And Agnes had long had this idea of convening a clan gathering at this piece of property that she had on the side of Grandfather Mountain called McCrae Meadows.
Right.
McCrae Meadows, there had been a boarding house there run by Alexander McCrae early in the 20th century. Alexander McCrae was a piper. Mm-hmm. And he would go out and pipe on McCrae Meadow and so forth. So she had this real connection to that idea. And
so if you were staying in that boarding house, you might listen to some bagpipe music.
You might, and you might have listened to the first person who played bagpipes in the state of North Carolina. I don't know that, but. Okay. I don't think there's any documentation of anyone any earlier that actually played.
Okay.
And so that was had to have been really, really interesting.
That would have made sense, though, right, Stephen? Because of the topography and where the Scots folks were settling,
Sure.
where they were building their homes.
Absolutely.
And that was home. And why don't you share with us why you think that was particularly a great place for someone with your heritage to settle? Was it like home?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the biggest difference there is that Grandfather Mountain has trees, and most of the highlands in Scotland don't have trees. They're treeless, but people have been living in Scotland for thousands of years, and so they were cutting and whacking and so forth. There's a big effort now in in Scotland to regenerate the forests.
How's that going?
It's going slow, but it's going. I mean, it takes a generation to grow a tree.
Sure.
But a lot of the fauna, a lot of the plants, the rhododendron, and so forth are very similar. Now, the mountains are higher here. McCrae Meadows is about elevation 4,400, and the tallest mountain in Scotland, Ben Nevis, is 4,000. So, but it's very, very similar, and I can clearly understand why the Scots felt so much at home when they made their way to the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Now, they were familiar with living in the mountains.
And they were familiar with living in the mountains. They knew what it meant to live at altitude. They were used to cold winters and cool summers.
So that seems like a natural blessing to have happen as people began to settle in this part of the world.
Yeah, as I understand it, North Carolina was settled from both ends toward the middle, and so these Scots came in. They'd come into Philadelphia or in someplace, and they go west until they hit the mountains, and then they'd turn right or turn left and filter out, and so Charlotte was settled before Raleigh. And then the Highland Scots that were recruited to the Cape Fear River came in, maybe Wilmington or somewhere, and they settled from the east, moving west. But a lot of the people that came into the Grandfather Mountain area moved from west down the mountain slopes to the east. So it's a long, rich heritage of Scots in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
A perfect setting for the Highland Games, right?
I think it's the most iconic setting in the world. It's and certainly contributes to the notoriety that the Games has. Notoriety in a good way.
Sure. I think it's worth talking about the idea, we have a lot of festivals in America. We have a lot of gatherings around music, around culture, but the Highland Games are at a high level of focusing on traditional pieces of history, right?
Well, certainly the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games are. There are other Highland Games across the country that are maybe less traditional, but at Grandfather Mountain, if a person stepped out of the 1956 crowd and attended the games in 2024, they would have seen many, many more people, but they would have seen the same events.
Okay.
Highland athletics, Highland dance, solo piping, etc. And so Grandfather Mountain has been very true to the history of games as they exist in Scotland. We have foot races around the track. That's very unusual for the U.S., but it is very traditional in Scotland to have foot races. And, we throw the heavy weights, and we do all that stuff just as it's been done for hundreds of years in Scotland. The sheaf toss at Grandfather Mountain, That's SHEAF, not SHEEP.
I'm getting ready to say we just opened the door.
Was brought over from the Loch Erned Highland Games, which is my clan's home Highland Games in Scotland, was brought over to Grandfather Mountain and first staged at Grandfather Mountain in the U.S., for example. Okay. And that's where you try to throw a bag of hay for height over a bar.
Right. We've filmed that several times, and when I first saw it, I said, "Is that a bale of hay?" And I said, "No, it's a bag." And then someone said, "Well, it is a bag, and it is hay. The hay is in the bag,
thrown with a pitchfork."
Exactly. But they're not thrown short distances.
No.
I mean, and it's vertical, so you do a lot of vertical things.
Thrown for height. Right.
Throwing for height. It's like the tabor toss, right? Or what we call it, the light poles.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing. So all of these games, are you saying that they go back hundreds of years?
Well, those events certainly do. I mean, the history of Highland Games can be traced, some say, to Malcolm Canmore in Scotland, who was a early king. Some say before that even that there were Highland Games staged in Ireland before that, but those are old events. Some of the Highland dance events, the Highland Fling was a celebratory dance if you were fortunate enough to have won your latest clan battle. And the sword dance was a dance that you did before what was going to be your next clan battle. And so those were these things are all rooted in history. They're centuries old,
and they have meanings.
They do have meanings.
Right.
The pipe tunes, the pibrochs that are played at Grandfather Mountain, many of those tunes are centuries old at this point. And it's a very tough contest. I mean, they're really closely judged, and we're fortunate in that the competitors that come to Grandfather Mountain in Highland dance, in athletics, and in piping are the best of the best that the U.S. has to offer. One of our pipers at Grandfather Mountain, Nick Hudson, just won the gold clasp in Scotland. And on that day, he was the best solo piper in the world.
Wow.
Because that contest said he was. He comes from Houston, Texas, and he's at Grandfather Mountain every year. And I ran into him in the bar at the hotel in Inverness, Scotland, the day he won this year, and which was a great surprise to both of us, I will assure you.
So you knew each other from the Highland Games,
each other from Grandfather, yeah.
All right. Yeah. And neither one of you knew that the other was going to be at that bar?
Absolutely not. The day before, I had been down and visited the Burns, museum in Ayrshire. The first guy I ran into had been a guest of the Scottish Heritage USA the year before at Grandfather Mountain.
So it's a big and a small world, isn't it?
It is. That's why you always have to behave when you go away from home.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm sure that the two of you enjoyed a nice cool glass of water.
Yes. We did have an adult libation to celebrate.
I think that's fine. So before we continue on with this, at this point, I want to ask this question, because I think it has merit. Here you are, at your stage of your life now, and you're serving in a leadership role. You're celebrating this culture that's your culture. How important is that? How important is it to be able to sit down and think about your past, and then have a gathering that celebrates that, knowing that a lot of people care about that? How has that improved or changed your life?
That is an interesting question. The Grandfather Mountain Highland Games within the world of Scottish heritage and Scottish culture and so forth is a big deal. There's no doubt about it. We are arguably the most famous Highland Games in the world. And I feel a very real and a very distinct responsibility to protect that role. We try as best we can to get it right. We don't allow participation by just any group that comes up. We've got a criteria. You have to be Scottish to have a tent on Clan Row. You have to have operated as an organized kindred for some reasonable period of time, a couple of 300 years. You got to be identified with a place and so forth. And so we just don't have people that come up and plop down money on the table and they automatically get to come in and participate. We do try very hard to protect things and do it right. And I think we receive a lot of credit for that. We certainly feel a strong sense of responsibility for that. The Highland Games, I took over as president in 2019. The Highland Games was very mature in 2019. It's been a bit of a rough ride during my presidency. We had COVID in 2020. Right. The Grandfather Mountain feels the responsibility of the Highland Games very deeply. The board does. And so one of the things that I'll use to illustrate that for you is what we did in 2020. We had no revenue in 2020. No games.
Right.
We donated $50,000 to vendors who couldn't vend, entertainers who couldn't sing, and so forth, because we felt that those people needed the help. They were going to look at basically a year with no income, and we felt, as our board member when he voted for it, Ron McGowan said, we need to take care of our own.
Right.
And so we were the only Highland Games in the United States that, to my knowledge, that did anything like that. And that was, I think, very illustrative of the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games and what we consider our place in this little world that we're in for the preservation of Scottish heritage and Scottish culture. We did that for those people, but we did it for ourselves too. Let's all try to have a Highland Games with no vendors and no entertainers, right?
Sure, that's going to be a problem.
We felt that we needed to help them, but we identified that need and we did something about it. And that's a unique place for the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games to be.
To be able to do that.
Yeah.
And if I go back and think about what you said a few moments ago about those who are in the tents, the families, the clan, those clans are there because they have the history. So they're trusted, right? So if they're there, you go from one, and I've made my way around and visited with everybody 2 or 3 times before, and some I had met before, but a lot of new people. They were probably there. I just didn't, you can't stand and talk to everybody for a long period of time. But everybody was so kind, so gracious, and I that was the common thread. But what you're saying is, what I heard you say was, look, these people have been vetted. They're the real deal. And that's something that the attendees can count on.
So those people are knowledgeable.
Right.
Many of them are quite knowledgeable about Scotland, and they're quite knowledgeable about the area in Scotland from which their family came. But they're certainly knowledgeable about their family, and they're a great source of information for those people. We look on those clan conveners, those people that run those clan tents, as our first line of our own staff. Many of those people are greeting visitors before the visitors greet anybody else. They come in and go to that McNeil tent.
Right.
And And so we are so grateful for those people, for those McNeils, for the work that they do on the displays for the tent and the work that they do when they just stand and talk to people. And I think that's a really, really, it's the most important thing that we have at the games. The Grandfather Mountain Highland Games is the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games and Gathering of Scottish Clans. That's the official name.
So it's that blending of the two.
It's that gathering that we keep coming back to. That gathering colors all of our thoughts on what we do. When I was talking about the piping and the dancing and so forth, those things are all very important, and they're very important for the value of the contest. They're very important for the value to the crowd. But the real deal that drives Grandfather Mountain is Clan Row and those clan tents.
So you're just taking care of family.
We are.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great thing, and having people there that that the general public can know that the families that are represented, the clan tents that are there, they're there, and they are voices of authority. So it's like going to the library, and absolutely whoever you're looking for, whatever your name is, somebody's there.
So we had 108 Scottish families, clans, last year. We are the largest gathering. We're not the largest Highland Games in the world. We're not the largest Highland Games in the United States. We don't have the property. Right. But we are the largest gathering of Scottish families in the world. And so you're absolutely right. If you come to the games, the chances of you finding a family connection are really, really high. We've got groups, Scottish Tartan Authority and the Council for COSCA, the Council of Scottish Clans and Associations, who run a tent for us and help you find your family. Right. So you can tell them.
So if you don't know, what about for those, Stephen, who think they might be, but they're not sure? They've done an Ancestry.com. They've done something, and they've got a lead of some sort. Is there help for those people who?
Yeah, that's what these folks do. So you can come over and say, my name, my grandmother's name was Charlotte Brown, and they will send you to the Cameron tent, because Browns are Camerons.
Okay. So they've got the code.
They've got the code. There are a lot of books and research and so forth that's been written that these groups draw on in order to help you find your family connections.
And that's important. And I guess when we go down that search journey, I was going to say rabbit hole, but it's grander than that, right?
I hope so.
But it's still the idea of where a lot of times, if you're new to history, if you're new to heritage, and a lot of people are. I mean, there are a lot of people that have their family Bibles. They have their family history and family pictures. But a lot of people don't have that now. So finding that, we know from other history stories, that seems to be a real important thing for people and giving people a sense of belonging. So since you're doing a thing that brings all these people together, how do you respond to that? Does this change your life when you find your roots?
It's incredibly rewarding. In 2021, when we came back from the year off from COVID, we had a very interesting thing that I observed at Grandfather Mountain, and that is many of our older crowd that we see year after year after year stayed home in 2021. And that was completely understandable. They were, COVID was still
right.
Some parts of the country raging.
That's right.
But there was a big dip in COVID cases in the Southeast in the middle of the summer in 2021, and so the state of North Carolina let us have games. Our crowd turned over in terms of age. We went from a crowd that was really sort of biased to older people, to a crowd that was biased to younger couples who brought their young children. And we had a really big crowd in 2021, although we tried to manage it down as best we could. But these people came, and so I had about 900 people tell me, I've never been to the Highland Games before. It's wonderful. I'll never miss another one. I found that incredibly rewarding. In 2022, those young couples with their children came back.
And
so did the older people.
But that's important, right?
It's very important. That's the message that we're trying to send. This isn't just an old person's game. This is for people who want to establish their family connection. They want to establish a family connection that hopefully will last for years and years. And one of these days they'll look up and they'll be 68 years old.
Right.
They'll be working the McNeil tent.
Right.
Having had 30 years of training to do that by the other McNeils that went before them. That's the point. And I find that very, very rewarding.
So this is a bit like just a really grand family reunion, isn't it?
It's a lot like a really big family reunion. And at Grandfather Mountain, there's a thing, and I just made up a word for it. I call it clanship. But we've all got kinship, where we've got a family reunion with our own family. But at Grandfather Mountain, you've got a reunion with your tent neighbors. Right? These people, they have a close relationship that really binds Clan Row together, and that's something that's very unique to Grandfather Mountain. I don't know why I don't see that at other Highland Games that I attend to the degree that I do at Grandfather. I don't know why we have that, but I treasure it.
I mean, maybe it's got something to do with nature, the altitude, because it is a special place.
I think it's the iconic location. McCrae Meadow is a special place. People talk about McCrae Meadow in reverential terms.
Right.
And I do think that you're on to something there. And I don't know that I need to understand it. I'm just glad that we have it, and I try to do everything that I can to continue to foster it.
They say a story is a good story if it has feeling to it, if you can feel it, if you can say something and it invokes a feeling not only in you, the presenter, but the people who are listening or watching, then that's a good story, right?
It is.
And that's what Grandfather Mountain Highland Games has. It has a lot of feeling.
It does. And people, I could cite so many people who walk through that main entrance the first time, and it's like, honey, I'm home. They feel it immediately, and they feel it so strong, and they come back year after year, and they contribute. They contribute with their efforts. They contribute with the conversations that they have with the people who come for the first time. They contribute in recruiting new members for their clan societies and so forth. And they just feel an absolute part of it, and it just emanates from them. And as an officer of the games, that's incredibly rewarding.
So we're talking about connecting with family, with heritage, with the music. Let's talk for a moment about the athletic side and how competitive the competitions are. And how do you classify that? Are these some of the best athletes in the world in certain areas? Or describe the athletic side for me.
All right. Our heavy Scottish athletics are run by Kenny Morrison, who is the son of one of the longest-serving, maybe the longest-serving past president, Ross Morrison. Kenny and his family have been associated with athletics forever. Kenny keeps his thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the athletics world, and so the professional athletes that come to Grandfather, both men and women, we now have women athletes also, are invited. And so Kenny controls the quality of the contest by whom he invites.
Okay.
We also have amateur contests, and there the amateurs have to have attained a certain standard. They have to have thrown, a 56-pound weight for a certain height in order to qualify and so forth. We don't take rank amateurs at the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, not because we don't realize that people start off as rank amateurs, but we don't really have the room to have an area over that they could be with themselves, and we don't want anyone hurt.
Right.
And so Kenny controls that, both for the safety of the athletes and the safety of the crowd.
So you're going to have basically your better athletes performing.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be, a crowd pleaser.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Similarly, our Highland Dance is the Atlantic International Championships. Many of the dance contests in the U.S. are closed. Southeastern Regional, Midwest Regional, whatever. Grandfather Mountain's open to anybody. So we have Canadians, we have Scots, we have dancers from New Zealand, Australia, all over the place. And so when you win a dance event at Grandfather Mountain, you can go home proud, I'll tell you that, because you've had to beat the best.
So it means something.
It certainly does. On the piping side, we have our open piping. Open is the top level of piping. Here are the best player. I just told you about Nick Hudson competing at Grandfather Mountain. He won the world class. He didn't win Grandfather Mountain.
Wow. How do you feel about that?
Nick? I guess he'll come back next year and try and win.
Well, that's the spirit of it all, isn't it?
It is. It is. As I said, we really try, Carl, we really do try to get it right. We want people to come to Grandfather Mountain, and we want that exposure that they get to the Camerons or the McNeils or the Bells. We want that to be the best it can be. And we want the exposure that they get to the athletics to be the best it can be. We want our parade of tartans on Sunday to be a massive source of personal pride to those people that get out and display that they're a part of the Clan McKinnon. We really want that. And you can see the joy on their faces. It's just marvelous.
I mean, that's one of the highlights, right? There are many highlights, but that's
it is.
I think it almost shows the grandness of it all. It shows the history.
There is some pageantry associated with the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games, and that parade's right at the top of the list of that. That's for sure.
Right. All right. So last time I was there, I heard a few grumbles, but the grumbles I thought were interesting because they were about parking and having to, wait in line for buses. I mean, to me, I'm like, well, that's just what happens with a huge event. But that does speak to the growth that you've had, right? That there are those challenges, but hey, that's better than not having the people.
6 out of the past 7 years, we have set attendance records.
Okay.
Year over year over year. We've made some pretty significant changes to the shuttle busing. Most of the people that come up to the games, the great majority of them, are transported up on busing. We've added 2 new busing companies, and we've put more buses in the circuit. We have changed some of the lots that we use for shuttles and so forth, and we've made some pretty big improvements in that area. It is always going to be, I think, the thing that we worry about the most. We We have a full-time staff of 3. The day after the games closes, we start work on the next games. And the first topic that we pick up is on-site parking and shuttle bus operations, so that we try to examine whether the modifications that we made were successful or not. The modifications that we make are normally you'd consider them tweaks rather than wholesale upending of the whole process, because we are pretty mature at doing this, and we do have limitations. We are in the mountains, and trying to find flat places to park 600 cars is a
little bit of a challenge.
A little bit of a challenge, but we do work on that hard.
Do you find that people, while there may be a little frustration on that side, continually celebrate how great the experience is? Because once you're in, you're there, and it's because of the way everything is shaped and the experiences that you're having. It's a very intimate type of an experience, and people really do seem to like that. The ones I've talked to seem to love it.
It's once you walk up to that gate and look at the mountain peak frame behind the entrance, pretty hard to stay mad.
Sure. That's right. There have been some unique experiences that we've had there over the years. You have a service in the what is it in the I remember it's early in the morning, and is it Sunday? You have the service, and it's, to me, I think we've been twice or 3 times filmed that, but it was almost surreal, because as the sun's coming up and the mist and the mountains, that's a special moment, isn't it?
It is. And so we do that from Preacher Rock with the crowd gathered below. We have a kirking of the tartans. Grandfather Mountain Highland Games was the first Highland Games to stage a kirking of the tartans. We didn't start the ceremony. That was started in Washington, D.C. in 1940s, 47, 48, something like that. And but we still do that, and that's where each clan sends a representative up with their tartan flag, and those flags are blessed. Those tartans are blessed at the end of the service. So we do that. Our Thursday night opening ceremonies, where the clans come out and declare themselves present on the field, is I think a really emotional experience. I've been involved with it all these years, and I still get chill bumps.
Right.
This past year, I was absolutely thrilled. My son went out and declared my clan, the McLarens, present on the field, and I was immensely moved by that.
Right. Was that the first time he had done that?
It was.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know how he enjoyed it, but I certainly enjoyed it.
Was it a moment of where, I don't want to get too deep into it, but was it that moment of, sounds like emotionally you may have thought it, but were you thinking, okay, the future's good?
I was. It was like the circle closing, right? And which is a very Celtic thing anyway, that circle of life. And it was like a circle closing. And I felt very, very rewarded by that. And we had Jamie McNabb over as the chieftain of the games several years ago, and his 14-year-old son, James, led the McNabbs in the tartan parade. He walked at the head. And Jamie was standing beside me as we took the clans in review, and he said, "Steve, I have never felt so proud." And now Jamie lives in Scotland.
Right.
I have never felt so proud as he stood here in North Carolina.
That says something.
It is.
So as we wrap up this moment together, it's kind of, if you would, wrap it all up with, yes, you've got the Highland Games. Yes, you've got this life that's filled with all sorts of gratitude for heritage and history. But as people on Earth, as people in the Carolinas, as people in America, what do we gain, and how are our lives improved when, whatever our heritage is, we take time to get to know it and celebrate it?
That I think that the feeling that the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games engenders amongst the people that come must be the same way that people of Polish descent feel in Chicago when they have those street fair type things. And I think it's just very important for people to celebrate both who they are and and where they come from. Those Kwanzaa celebrations, those Greek festivals, I think they're all just wonderful. At the root of it all, except for the Native Americans, we're all immigrants.
Right.
We all came from someplace else. And I think it's very important to us to honor those who went before us, to celebrate who they were, to celebrate the courage that they exhibited in coming over, and to honor the fact that they loaded up and went off into the great Wild West and,
right.
Established Topeka, Kansas.
Right.
And so I think those things are really very important. And very important at the most fundamental level with people. We should be proud of our families.
It's a good thing.
It is.
Thank you for spending time with us on Life in Wilkes. We value you as a viewer and appreciate when you share the show with your friends and family. Be sure to bookmark our channel and join us again on the next episode of Life in Wilkes.